So, what did you guys think of the first two assignments?
For
I
this week
love
or
it.
last week?
Well, for week one, week two.
I liked them. Yeah. I see where I could have done better, so that's always fun.
Yeah, I caught that little. You had image one and image three were like the same 12 o'clock.
I know.
I think it was 12 o'clock high.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, it's funny because I had another student do that, and I said, "Are these the same image?" And she said, "Yeah, because the 12 o'clock low, the light was behind the couch, so I didn't know what to do about it." I was like, "Oh, well, that's fair. Okay." Yeah, so that was funny. And you didn't have any problem. You had help, right, Cliff, with the lighting for tone?
I had my wife as my
You had some.
subject, and what I did is I printed that worksheet out and I placed it on top of her head, and then I marked off
That's right.
the time on on the floor so I can get the proper. So I put each one in the same spot.
That's why I sent you that note about how your wife was being a good sport when I heard that you'd put
Yeah,
the map on her head.
yeah.
I was like, that poor woman. She's probably going, "What have I gotten myself into?"
But she did that way before then.
Yeah, nice. So we're moving into movement now, and I know that it's kind of a mixture of what do I want to say? Theory and DIY, because obviously you guys aren't going to have access to things like professional dollies and steady cams and things of that nature. Although I've had a couple of students in recent classes invest in glide cams, of all things, in order to do their assignments, which you're not expected to do. I'd like to point that out. Um,
Mhm.
but so there'll be a little bit of DIY in your efforts for your assignment this week. Um, so I think it's mostly the focus should mostly be on the concepts of the movement, and the degree of refinement that you're able to achieve obviously will be commendable, but it's more about executing the concepts of movement, you know, as best you can with the assets or resources you have available to you. I don't expect you to go out and rent a dolly. I don't expect you to buy a glide cam. But there are some things that you can do to accomplish movement that you might already have, at your disposal. Skateboards um, for movement. Some people, believe it or not, have wheelchairs from elderly family members and so forth that they can utilize. A wheelchair makes a great dolly sometimes with a handheld camera. Obviously, handheld is a technique that you can begin working on now, and in an effort to get better at that as we move forward, because handheld is kind of a staple of our industry, particularly now. It's sort of threaded into the fabric of filmmaking. It's almost expected to have a certain amount of handheld work in your projects, dramatic projects, narrative projects, anyway, as part of the style um, that we're currently experiencing. Um, and it can also be handy to have a good solid handheld technique available to you at any time that you can achieve a movement for lack of a piece of specialized gear. For instance, I was scouting a shot today uh, in which I want to backpedal about the move itself. We did it several times and came out the average duration of the move is 34 seconds. And I'm backpedaling about 60 feet with the talent in order to accommodate the length of the shot and in order to get certain compositions into the frame in the duration of the shot. And initially, I thought I was going to have to do that shot today when we were shooting, but it was determined that if we waited until Friday, that I'd have better access to the library that we're going to do this move in, because we don't want to interfere with people that are there doing research and working earnestly and using the institution for what it was designed for. So not only would I have better access on Friday, but I would also be able to employ a piece of gear that I do have, but I didn't have with me today, which was the Ronin gimbal device. So I was prepared to do my handheld today if needed, using I like the Fig Rig by Manfrotto, because it's kind of like a giant steering wheel. And
Mm-hmm.
since I was shooting with I was actually shooting with a camera you guys might have the FS5, or do you guys have the FS700?
At the
Correct.
FS700.
You have the 700. Okay, I may end up with the 700 on Friday, and if I do, that's certainly more than I want to have in the Fig Rig,
Mm.
if I can avoid it. But it may also be. I've had the 700 in the Ronin before. I know it fits, and I know I can achieve balance with it. It's not ideal. I mean, the FS5 would be a nicer camera to have in the Ronin. But I can use that piece of gear on Friday if we were to postpone completion of the shot from today and push it to Friday. So we pushed it to Friday. I shot an alternate piece instead to make use of the block of time that I released from the shooting schedule today. And so we're going to employ a specialized piece of gear. But had that not been possible, I would have had to do the walk today using the Fig Rig. Um, and the reason I like the Fig Rig is because every little movement of my horizon is real obvious to me when the ratio of this to camera is greater. You know what I'm saying? If I just
Right.
if I was holding the camera like so and trying to walk backwards, or even I sometimes will cradle it in my hand like this and just sort of, you know, that translation is a lot more obvious, you know, than
Uh-huh.
it is when I'm way out here with my hands. So I like the Fig Rig for that reason, because even though I'm not being aided by any mechanics, I can still maintain a fairly reliable horizon, because of the configuration of the grip. So that is one of my personal solutions to having to do a quick, non-assisted handheld shot, is to employ a device as simple as a Fig Rig that I can have with me every day when I shoot. I throw it on the mag liner, hang it off the handles of the mag liner, and it's there if I need it. And I can just grab it really quickly and I can go. The other thing that I noticed a couple of weeks ago when I was shooting was that in a pinch, if I have to do, a few feet backwards, or a quick side to side, or, a small push in, I noticed that I was using a monopod because I was dealing with a lot of people at a lecture. And so I didn't want to have a tripod that I was moving around the room each time I picked a different shot of somebody at a lectern, or if I was looking at the audience for some reason. So what I employed was a monopod, so I could get steady shots when I needed them. Not as steady as a tripod, because you can't let go of a monopod, but as long as you don't move much on the monopod, you can get the same feel of a tripod. But then I can pick up and I can walk really easy, and I don't have this large footprint. And I noticed that the monopod, if I just choked it around I put a quick release base plate on top of it, so I can move my camera from piece to piece to piece, and it always has the same sliding base plate attached. I can click into the monopod fast. I can choke it right up underneath the base plate like that with two fingers, and it makes kind of a pendulum. And I can either do that with just my arm for, a quick 24-inch move or slide, or I can walk a few feet with a monopod. and the counterbalance of the monopod itself, because I have one of the beefier Manfrotto monopods, it acts a little bit like a pendulum and gives me a little bit of horizon control with the monopod, as long as I use my index finger and my thumb as sort of uh, a blood gimbal, and I can get a quick move that way that's fairly steady. So there's things that you can do without the aid of expensive mechanical advantage, like a Ronin or a glide camera, a steady camera, or anything. So think about that next week. And you also want to just practice your pan and zoom technique, um, your pan technique, your tilt technique. And it's that might sound a little obvious to you, but believe it or not, the way you start and stop on a pan or the way you start and stop on a tilt up or down says a lot about your operating style and your operating ability. If you're just sort of crashing in to your starts and stops, it makes sometimes your edit points a little problematic, but it also demonstrates a lack of awareness of frame. And the way I say that is, you choose always where your frame's going to land, you know, and unless you're one that constantly readjusts your frame, which is also kind of a contemporary style, but I chalk that up to indecision more than I do to style. If you know where that frame wants to land, you have to be able to feather in nicely to where you want that frame to fall. Like I was all the way out on my zoom lens today, and I was shooting a woman at a working terminal on a computer, and she was doing a lot of checking of her notes, like so, and then typing on the keyboard and looking closely at the screen, and then sitting back to consider her work before she went back in and typed again. I don't know what she was working on, but she was very animated for somebody sitting at a working terminal. And so I had to make choices about, all right, what's my frame? How am I going to let that frame end? And am I going to be able to feather into it and make it, a working piece of film, or is this going to be pot luck? And so, I knew there were certain compositions I wanted within the keyboard, watching the fingers on the keyboard, and then I would do what I call handoffs, which when you're doing with two people in a conversation, I call it handing off, because you'll let somebody talk and then you'll hand it off to the response without a cut in between, and you'll allow for that pan to happen within the shot. Well, I was kind of doing that with her hands and her face, and she was kind of sitting away from me 3/4. So I didn't get a full look at her face. So I knew I didn't want to hover on that shot, because why do you shoot the back of somebody's head? That doesn't make any sense. But I could see her monitor, I could see her keyboard, I could see her notes she was working with, and I could see enough of her face that I knew that if I was moving between those couple of compositions, I could get these nice flowing shots as long as I knew where I wanted my frame to land, and I knew how to feather into that landing spot without searching for the right, if I had something in the right of frame I was using um, as my constraint or my barrier, like a windowsill I think I had on the camera right side. And on the camera left side, I was using the contour of her head and shoulders and body as my restriction camera left. So I knew I didn't want to shoot over those 2 points, otherwise I would have, compositions that are, you know, unrefined, let's say. So knowing how to move into those spots and make a choice while you're on the move, because if you do these things live or if you do these things for edit, your move is in the shot. So it's not like they're going to cut away to something else. I mean, they will if you don't execute properly. But sometimes you can make those moves within the shot, and you can leave it that way, as long as you know how to come into a nice feathered landing and not boom, not MTV search and stop, Um, if you can get the hang of that move, you can do it a lot in narrative, and save, the editors sometimes making choices about, oh God, what do I cut to? He gave me a bad last line and I don't have anything to cut to, and the shot kind of stopped. There's nothing to pull out on the handle. If you know how to do a handoff, you can go to the other person in the shot and they can respond, or you can do counter moves, which is kind of Steven Spielberg's stock and trade, where he'll start on a close up and he'll counter out maybe to a wide two shot of something going on, and he'll build the move right into the shot so that maybe in the course of a scene that's running for a minute, he might have, 2 or 3 points of key where he started on one size and composition, shifted to something else, and then moved into a final all in the same shot. If you look at some of Spielberg's work, especially when he was at the peak of his popularity, he does that a lot. He doesn't make use of overly choppy editing to accommodate bits and pieces that he gathered individually. He likes the moving camera changes that changes shot design within the shot itself. So don't think of panning as just panning and tilting as just tilting. Think of it as ways of adding dynamic move to your scene without actually leaving the tripod or in conjunction with another piece of movement equipment like a dolly. Do you buy any of that?
Yeah, I have a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine let me borrow some of his equipment, so we have a homemade crane that I've used in the past, and he has a Ravelli Steadicam, and so I don't know if I could hook my camera up to that piece of equipment or not. And he does have a dolly and with track and all that, but instead of the dolly, I decided to borrow his wheelchair for the dolly shot.
There you go. Perfect. What kind of crane are we
Now,
talking about?
this is a homemade crane,
Yeah.
and it could go about 12 feet or so in the air and comes down. I've used it in the past,
Okay.
so, but I put up a link up there, and this is a video that I directed, but I also, even though not listed as one of the cinematographers, I did a lot of the cinematography as well. I just let the other people have credit because I use a lot of their equipment.
Oh, that's great. So it's more like a
So,
jib, really, than a crane. In other words, you're not riding it. There's nobody riding it.
right,
Uh, oddly
correct,
enough,
correct.
oddly enough, as you mentioned, homemade cranes. One of the first operators that I worked with made his own tulip crane. You remember what the tulip crane was from Matthews, Cliff? You remember the
Yeah,
tulip
yeah.
crane? So
No.
Brett made a tulip crane. He copied it out of the Matthews catalog. I mean, this is a full size crane that two people can ride if desired. And he did all the right things. I mean, he copied the designs. He built it all himself, welded it out of steel, had many of the critical welds X-rayed, and I remember for several years in my youth as a camera assistant working with Brett with that crane, and not only was it stable for shots, stable enough for the two of us to ride, me as the focus assistant and Brett as the operator, but we did a number of Steadicam step offs with that crane as well,
Nice.
removing the seats and the pedestal portion of the crane. So we just had a platform, and then the grips would rig a speed rail. It's more not less of a railing than it was kind of a bumper for him to settle it back against as he was up in the air. But you can't corral the Steadicam operator in because once the Steadicam hits the floor, he's got to step off and start his walk. Um,
Right.
so what would happen was since and I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but I happened to weigh as much as Brett did wearing the Steadicam. So well, I wouldn't ride with him on a step off, obviously. When he did step off, the procedure was the crane would come down, it would feather down to the deck, and I would step onto the turret as Brett was stepping off with the rig. So the balance was maintained by having me on the rig. You see?
Right,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
and because I had a radio controlled focus aid, I could stay standing there if I had to while Brett continued his walk. And as long as his pace stayed the same with whatever our subject was, I could eyeball that from a great distance if I had to and continue maintaining focus with the Steadicam because I had the radio controller in my hand. But oftentimes what would happen would be I would step onto the turret as Brett was stepping off. And as I'm waiting on the turret and Brett starts his walk, I'm watching the focus and the grips are piling heavy bags onto the boom of the crane down by the turret and putting my weight on in terms of sandbags so then I can step off and catch up with Brett with the controller and continue to focus. And we did that a
Mm.
number of times off of a full-size crane for certain kinds of jobs where, in narrative television where you were trying for something really visually dynamic. And that, at the time, that was still kind of a rare move that people would do. You might see it more often now because there's actually other tools that make that kind of work easier, namely DJI helicopters and things of that nature, and smaller handheld rigs that make it easier for the operator to go in, for instance, into the back seat of a car from a walk, and then the car takes off and moves, and the operator is now inside with the talent. Those are easier moves to do on gimbals, but the Steadicam step off was that was one of your special talents that you could dangle at negotiation time when they were doing the hiring for a show, and they say, well, why should we pay you $5 an hour more than the last guy we used? Well, could he do this? And
Hmm.
it added to your repertoire. But we also used to
Right.
use, with the Steadicam, I don't know how much traditional Steadicam experience you have, but there is a clamp for an actual Steadicam. In other words, a Cinema Products or a Tiffin Steadicam. There is a clamp product that can be manufactured or purchased called a Garfield clamp. And you may have seen this clamp in action. It's rarely featured. In other words, it's rarely seen just the clamp itself because there's a certain amount of trade voodoo that's being hidden there. Guys don't want you to see how they built their Garfield clamp because if everybody knows it, then everybody's got the secret and everybody starts doing it. But the Garfield, the peculiar thing about the Garfield clamp was that the tit or receiver on the Steadicam arm, where it docks into the vest, has a peculiar conical taper to it. So in other words, if you've ever done any manufacturing or if you've ever done any machining where you're assembling parts with joints A and B, even if it's wood and not necessarily metal. Like if I had a cylindrical mortise and a cylindrical tenon for a joint in a chair, let's say, um, if it's truly cylindrical and you make that joint seat, it can sometimes bind if it's meant to go in and out a lot. All right. But if you're just gluing it and then that's it, you can usually get it to seat. And if it won't go in, you drive it in with a mallet. But if something has to seat and unseat routinely, it needs to have a taper designed into the tenon so that it goes in and there's less pressure required to pull it out if you need to pull it out. And I'll tell you where that technology is most prevalent, and that is with manufacturers that do metal casting. In the blueprint of a metal casting, there's an A and there's a B um, mold, essentially, or there's an A form, and the B is the molten composite that gets poured into the form, and as it cools, they remove it, and you have a part. Well, those parts, you may not notice it, but those parts have a taper to them so that they can be pulled out of the mold once the metal's been cooled. Let me do this real quick. I've totally lost. That's strange. Hello? Oh, connection restored. You guys still there? Hello?
Can you hear us?
There you are. Okay.
Ah, there we
That
go.
was strange. That was, I lost internet for a moment there. That was very strange.
Ah. You
Uh,
froze, and that was it. Yeah.
I froze. Did I look good?
You look, well,
All
yeah,
right.
your eyes were open.
My eyes were open. Good. So you didn't get.
No.
You
Okay.
didn't get that front. No.
So where did you lose me?
You're talking about the clamp, and then
I lost you at the
You
clamp.
know, yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
early,
You
in
talking
the
about it
Garfield.
taking it in and
yeah,
out, and they
tapering.
need to have that bind. You know, it would bind.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. All right. So at least you got the part about the taper on the Steadicam arm. Okay. So I was saying when I was interrupted that you see evidence of the taper in manufacturing with castings when you have a molten casting from like a sand or a wood form. When they pour the molten metal in, and it cools, that metal has to then be extracted from the mold, and it's easier if the design of or in within the feature of the thing being molded, there's a taper so that it pops right out of the mold even after it's cooled and sort of bonded inside there. So the Steadicam arm, the actual tenon that goes into the vest had a peculiar taper to it. And so a lot of guys would protect the manufacturing of their Garfield clamp so that you didn't realize how they achieved that taper in the receiver of their Garfield clamp. But once they had that clamp, they could mount it to things like ATC motorcycles, very popular, mount it to the back of a camera car. You could mount the Steadicam to the door of a helicopter. Anywhere you could think of mounting that arm, you could mount it and you could hang the Steadicam off of it, and you could achieve, the steady effect without having to be wearing the actual rig. So we're sort of, I've seen a few YouTube videos where guys were doing something similar to that, but I don't know from the manufacturers now that exist that are making these, steady assisted devices like Pro Aim or VeriZoom or um, I mean, there's a number of companies out there that are making rip-offs, for lack of a better word. I don't know if they included an odd taper in their design or not. And if they don't, it's even easier to make a Garfield clamp if they don't. But one of the things you'll have to be aware of is that sometimes the clamp will bind onto your arm as you're trying to remove it and restore the arm into your vest and use it traditionally. But the Garfield clamp for years was that was a trade secret for a long time. If a guy had a Garfield clamp and he didn't buy it from Cinema Products, that meant he had some skills because he knew how to make that and make it successfully and to accommodate the taper of the receiver on the arm. Nowadays, you can handhold a gimbal. The bungee cam rig sort of democratized a lot of the handheld gimbal work because it's easy to build a bungee cam from parts from Home Depot uh, or the local sporting goods store, because the tubing that people are using now for resistance training and stuff has a very similar dynamic performance that bungee cord does, and then you don't have to worry about finding bungee cord in bulk, or you can use bungee cord uh, load restraints. You can buy them at Home Depot, to bungee stuff in the back of your pickup or whatnot. So the bungee cam rig and the handheld gimbal now have sort of democratized that whole situation where you're moving the rig with a steady assisted device, with or without the operator, to get a really nice and irregular move on irregular terrain, upstairs, downstairs in a stadium. The opening shot in Rocky, for instance, was, I think, the second official Steadicam move in cinema history. You know, it's ubiquitous in movies now, the Steadicam move. But the gimbal now, particularly the gimbal assisted by the Easy Rig, seems now to be the modus operandi of a lot of people, because it's a more economically affordable prospect to get into for instance, a Ronin for $2,000 or $3,000, and an Easy Rig knockoff for $1,000. For $3,000, $4,000, you're into that whole smoothness of movement that you can achieve with that equipment that used to cost you $40,000 to $60,000 or more with a Steadicam. So that's a recent development. And think about stuff like that when you're in your DIY mode this weekend, do-it-yourself mode. How can you achieve similar results with cobbling together stuff out of your garage? Sometimes that makes the assignment even more fun. Skateboard.
How about the movies?
Well, yeah. I mean, Movi's a great tool. But even something as simple as a skateboard dolly, we got a nice little Tom Antos video in there where he talks about how he made his skateboard dolly. And believe it or not, I mean, the skateboard dolly is obviously a brilliant piece of practical engineering by somebody who realized they needed a long, glassy move and they weren't going to be able to afford a Fisher or a Chapman dolly. But oddly enough, the idea actually came from the larger manufacturers. There was a dolly grip out there that started using the channel wheels on the actual Chapman dolly on the track. And the reasoning was, on a longer lens, particularly a very long lens, telephoto, during the course of a dolly move, if you haven't laid your track perfect, every seam in the dolly track, which occurs every 8 to 10 feet, was a very almost imperceptible bump that doesn't feel like or look like anything on a 35 millimeter lens. But on a 200 or 300 millimeter lens, it's an earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what he reasoned out was that the professional dolly, as well as it was designed, the point of contact on the track was 1 point per tire. And that meant that there was only 4 actual point loads of that dolly on the track. And so that results in demonstrative movement on a long telephoto lens, because the seams in the dolly track and the waves in a dolly track are ultimately perceptible on that long lens. And he reasoned that it was because of the number of points of contact. And he decided that the more points of contact I have, the more I can divide that bump into points of contact and reduce the overall effect inside the lens, right? So he put 8 wheels in every corner of the dolly under the primary wheel, and he did it with skateboard wheels, and he used aluminum channel to marry everything together. So the tires of the dolly sit in the channel. The skateboard wheels now are the point of contact to the track, and because there's 8 of them in every corner, he's now got 32 points of load on the track instead of 4. And the move is 8 times smoother as a result.
Right, yeah.
Okay. So that's just understanding technology, having a little bit of DIY practicality built into everything that you do, and really knowing what your craft is all about, and understanding what you're trying to achieve and what the engineering limitations of your tools can be, and then overcoming that. So I kind of think that, the guy who invented the skateboard troughs, we called them, was in his own right a genius, a really perceptive dolly grip who was paying attention to what was going on. And he was smart enough to solve a major problem with tools that he got from Venice Beach at the skateboard shop, So try to incorporate a little of that spirit in your movement videos this week to overcome the challenge of not having, a real tool maybe to work with. Do you buy that sermon?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
I'm not hearing a lot of talk out there. I'm not sure if you guys think I'm
Yeah.
crazy or what. Um, so you're going to have panning, tilting, zooming. That's another one that you want to refine. And, that's as simple as learning how to feather that rocker switch on your camera if you're using the kit zoom that you guys have.
Mm.
And varying the speed of the rocker switch on the camera. I don't know if you realize you can do that or not, but you should have a low,
Right.
medium, and a high speed on your rocker zoom. And I used to have medium or high on the hand grip of my video my video camera, and then invariably there would be another rocker on the top handle of the video camera, and that one was always set to low. That was like creep mode on the zoom, and a lot of times I could just hold down the low speed rocker on top of the camera and get a subtle little slow push in on a interview or a conversation without having to move the camera. So and that develops, that you need to develop a touch for that, a little hand-eye coordination or a little bit of manual dexterity to be able to work that rocker switch without having the herky jerky starts and stops that you can get with a power zoom rocker on a video camera. So practice that as well. Zoom, pan, tilt, and then you got the follow shot, which can be handheld or on a dolly. You got handheld mode in general. There's 5. Okay, and within the follow shot, we have truck, which is side to side movement, and we have the follow, and we have the lead, where you lead the subject in the move, and they walk at you as they deliver. And the follow, you're usually over the shoulder of somebody, and you're subjectively moving the camera with that motivation to pick up the action happening from the point of view of the person that you're following over the shoulder, right? Like somebody walking up to another individual to initiate a conversation on the street. Subjectively, you're over, say, camera right shoulder over on somebody walking up to meet somebody in front of a cafe. And so the resulting shot as you come in and settle into your number 2 is an over on the person you're following and a what we call a dirty single or an over onto the person waiting at the cafe. Okay, that can be done with a Steadicam, a gimbal, or handheld. So you have every sort of availability to you to get 5 varieties of moves into your project for week 3 without having to necessarily have complex gear. Although it's always nice when you can throw money at a problem until it goes away. But in this case, since we're not HBO or Warner Brothers, um, we have to figure these things out and make it work regardless with what we have around us. So that's where the handheld technique really comes in handy, so to speak, no pun intended. And how you execute, makes all the difference in the world.
Mm.
I
The
would,
question I have,
yeah.
the question I have about the assignment so far is when I looked at the sheet, I mean, it asked for one uh, photo and stuff. I mean, do you want like 5 sheets where you get one of each style, or that was a little confusing to me.
I will be honest with you. Most of the time, the set photo is so that I can sleuth together the reasons why a student had a problem with their assignment. I can spot, a bad placement on a light, or I can, immediately spot bad framing or bad settings on the camera that contributed to an issue that they couldn't solve. It's
Right.
mostly for that, um, and less critical that I have a set photo of everything that you're doing, unless you're doing something complex and you really feel that it helps explain what you were doing at the time, certainly. And of course, frame grabs can be pulled right out of your videos. So your lighting diagram and your set photo. I mean, if you do 5 setups and you just give me, one set of set photos and diagram to illustrate what you had going on, I mean, that's fine, because basically, I mean, I'm looking at the list of students right now that are with me tonight, and none of you guys are going to give me cause for concern that you're going to do something, you know, grossly inadequate for the assignment. Um, so, use your own discretion in how many photos you want to send to me at that point in time. I do like the submission notes, regardless of who the student is, just so that I know exactly what was in your mind at the time that you performed the assignment, because sometimes, things, a student can demonstrate something that can be interpreted in a few different ways, depending on the point of view of the instructor. So I like to know, in your own words, what it was you were going for, so that I can then evaluate your performance based on that information, instead of me making an inference about what you meant at the time you did it, as opposed to what you can easily tell me in a quick paragraph. Because my experience has told me, I can sit in a movie theater and I can poo-poo, all kinds of stuff that I see on the screen, saying, oh, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. The problem with that thinking is you don't know what challenges the filmmakers were up against on the day. For instance, were they running out of light? Was the day getting too long? Did they suddenly find out that their actor had to leave in a half an hour and they didn't have them until the end of the day, and so they had to move really fast? Did a generator die and they switched over to house power, so the lighting changed, and they came up with a solution that they thought was sensible given the challenges, and that didn't translate to the screen? Or any myriad of problems you can have on a film set that never translates, and shouldn't, to the final image. So in other words, it's easy to be an armchair quarterback if it's not you that's down there taking the hits. But if I know what was in your mind and know what you were trying to achieve through your submission notes, I have a better sense or a better understanding, and particularly if there was an issue. And it avoids me sending a lengthy sort of Captain Obvious comment to you about something happening in your video, if I knew the backstory. So the submission notes are really important. And then, the frame grabs from your finished video are less important, unless you're putting them into the worksheet, like with the lighting for tone or the lens worksheet. Sometimes I want to look through the entire video because I want to see how that subject moved in its own space. And sometimes it's pretty obvious. The lighting's beautiful. I don't need to see the video clip. The still image is fine. That's what those frame grabs are for. But the setup shots and things like that are more for me to have an inside view of what the student was dealing with, especially if they had a problem and they're having trouble figuring out why. So use that information when you are working on your assignments as well.
The other question I had is, I had completed, I directed it, and actually I was part videographer for a short we did a little while ago. Can I use that? I used all these elements in the scene, and actually I put a link to it there in the discussion section.
If the clip, and here's the thing, ordinarily, with, normal students, quote unquote, if they have something that they already shot and they want to submit it as a homework assignment, I generally say no. And the reason why is because the more you practice something, the more shooting you do, the better you get at doing it. So showing me something you did 3 months ago or 6 months ago, or a year ago at that level of development would be like me showing you something I shot 10 years ago and trying to pass that off as my most recent evidence of my skill level. I'd be a fool to do that because
Mhm.
I'm a new guy every 5 to 7 years. And I have different ways of viewing and achieving everything that I do, even now with all this, right? So I don't want to show you some old work. I want to show you my most recent work so you can get the best sense of who I am as a technician now. And so a young student, I'm like, no way, man. You got to give me fresh material. This is a new class. You know, what you did even last month might not stack up to what you're going to be able to do after I've gotten my hands on you for 3 to 4 weeks. So in those cases, I say no. Now, in the case of you guys, I've been sort of tracking what you've been doing now since we met, in earlier classes. And if you have a clip that's relevant to week 3 and the stuff that I'm wanting you to demonstrate, I will accept it. And I'm going to rely on you're on the honor system now. If you're just sending me a
Mhm.
clip
Yes.
because you don't want to do any work this week, I'm going to know.
Right.
I'm going to know.
He's
But
gonna know.
if you think it's relevant, you know, if you think it's relevant, go, I'll allow it from the group I'm seeing here on the screen because I know each of you guys now pretty well, at least from an associate point of view. And I don't think you're going to send me any BS. You're not going to gold brick me.
Mhm.
Um, but I have had a couple of students that have. In fact, I had to educate a student on exactly the definition of gold bricking and why his assignment was rejected. Because, I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. And if I had you in a previous class and you gave me a clip, believe it or not, as old as I'm getting, I remember what I've seen. And I know that he sent me that clip before in a different class for a different reason. And I'm like, no way,
Mhm.
man. You got to give me fresh work. Fresh. So,
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. This was a video, a music video that we shot. I directed it, and I said I was one of the cinematographers on there, and I did majority of the cinematography on it. But we used all the elements. I used the jib. We used a dolly tracks. We used a tracker, handheld, uh, stuff like that. But it's also a 6 minute video.
oh, really? I got to sit through 6 minutes. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I know.
Yeah.
And
No,
like I
that's fine.
said, the link is in the discussion box there
All right.
from where it's on YouTube already.
But here's what you can do for me. You might have, how long ago did you shoot that?
A couple of years ago.
Oh, we're getting into that window.
Yeah.
Is it still relevant to you? To me, it's not about relevant to me. Is it relevant to your skill level?
Honestly, I think it is because I think I'm there and maybe a little further, but that aspect took me from where I was with nothing to the experience that I had with the different pieces of equipment. Again, not only as a cinematographer, but as a director to figure out how I wanted the shots to portray into the video, but how to make it relevant to the video.
Okay. Will it bear scrutiny?
I think it will. Uh,
Because I'm going to wreck
but
you. You know it.
yeah, I know.
In other words, you did it 2 years ago and it's a packaged finished product, but you don't have cinematic immunity. If I
Right.
if I see something that could have been improved, I'll mention it to you for the sake of
Mm-hmm.
right for the sake of knowledge and improvement, not for the sake of criticism and I wouldn't have done it that way. It's not about that. It's about well, okay, uh, given that this was done, you know, a significant time ago, and you may be better at it. Are you aware that your framing could have been here, or your lighting could have been this, or your move could have been this?
Yeah.
If you can,
I'm not trying to get out of the assignment,
right? No,
but
no. I hear what you're
on
saying,
my
and I totally understand where you're coming from. So as long as you can sign on to that, and you can do, you can do some things for me. You can give me some mission notes. You can give me, to the best of your ability, reconstruct a lighting or a camera movement diagram for me.
Mm-hmm.
If you can give me a setup diagram, because you won't be able to give me a set photo at this point because it's already happened. But you can give me an all-inclusive set diagram. Then you can give me a movement or a lighting diagram. And then for the sake of the worksheet, if it requires any stills, you can pull some frame grabs out of the video for me. You can supply and the submission notes. If you can supply
Right.
me
Yeah.
all of that supporting material that would go with a normal assignment, then go ahead and submit it as so.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, because I'm not sure how my back's going to be doing this weekend. So
I know that plays.
not that I'm trying to get out of it, but I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can I complete this?
Yeah, I know that that's playing into it. So, yeah, like I said, if you are okay with all those conditions, then go ahead and submit it.
Okay. Again, I'm going to try to do, because I said I have my friend's equipment that he brought over today. I'm going to try to set up something new to do for this weekend. But if my back is out,
Okay.
it's like, what do I do?
All right. And Dex,
Yes, sir.
welcome, by the way. I see that you joined us a little bit after the fact, but I wanted to say um, in the past, I don't know where you're at now, but in the past, I haven't seen in your music videos, I haven't seen you demonstrate a lot of camera movement. So
Yes.
if at all possible, I would like you to submit me some fresh work. And this is not a demotion in any way. It's just
No, no,
that
no.
in the work that I've
I'm
seen
100.
before, I mean, your lighting is great and your compositions have been
Yes.
really great, but I've just never seen you do a
Yes.
lot of movement. So if you can do
Which is
something
why
like
I'm in
that,
class tonight.
yeah, okay, good.
Yes, sir. I'm really, really. I agree with you 100%, Professor Mike. I really, really do, and
Okay,
um, I'm totally committed to that. Like increasing a lot of well, adding movement.
great.
I've been shooting a lot. I've been I mean, more so than anything, I really need to take in as much information about this particular topic as I can,
Okay, good.
and I'm excited about it. I'm with it. I'm definitely gonna aim to do so, sir.
Great. Excellent. I have less of a Mitch I'm addressing now. I have less of a intimate familiarity with your prior work. So
That's okay because I'm going to be doing this for sure.
I'm interested in seeing. I mean, dude, if your technique matches up to your academic analysis, you're going to have a career ahead of you. I guarantee you that.
I
Um,
wish I have some ways to go in my technique.
don't we all? So
Yes,
I'm
yes,
interested
me
in seeing
too.
what you can come up with, guys. I'm not kidding when I say that. I'm 50 years old. I've been in the film business since I was 19. Okay, and I'm learning every day. I'm out tech scouting today, and I'm shooting interviews today, and I'm lighting on the fly, and I'm doing things. I mean, I did some stuff today with LED panels that I never would have thought possible even 5 years ago because the technology wasn't really, it wasn't there yet. Now it is, and I'm still learning, you know, and especially after a break, I got busted up pretty good and I spent a couple of years riding pine because I was healing and I was in traction and stuff like that. So you get rusty just from sitting on the sidelines and watching other people play. Getting back into it. And then my God, I, I was carried off of a film project on a flatbed, right? Film cameras, big lights, Sony Studios, the whole deal. I get back in the game at 48 years old, and everything's Alexas now. It's digital. DI meant something different even 8 years ago than it means now. DI 8 years ago, before I got hurt and left the industry, like on that scale, meant the color negative had to be scanned by a Northlight scanner and it had to be turned into a digital file, which was then brought into a digital pipeline. It was color corrected as it went from film to digital, and then it was color corrected for aesthetics, and it was edited virtually on nonlinear editing systems, and it was squirted out as a digital file to a movie theater 2,000 miles away as a DCP file, and project it at 8 o'clock at night on a Friday night, like just like there was a platter upstairs from a film projector, right? The world,
Mm-hmm.
while I was under the knife, the world went like this, right? So, I get back into the field and I'm going, you did what with what? Really? No. So, I mean, even somebody who's been at it for a long time, I'm learning every day that I go out and I do stuff, I'm learning. So if I'm learning, you guys better be learning, right? Because
Yes,
I'm
sir.
not
Yes,
done,
sir.
and if you keep yourself educated, keep yourself on the cutting edge of what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve, and always keep in mind the end game, right? Of what you're
Mm-hmm.
really trying to do. That's most important. And staying up on the technologies and the techniques. Read other cameramen, read other directors, know who they are, know what they've done. It's so funny that I get students. Even last month I'm getting students in cinematography too. Well, I haven't seen The Godfather. You what? You better
What?
go to the movie video store. They don't even have those anymore. Go online to
Mm-hmm.
Netflix and watch that movie. Why? Is it, if it came out now, would it make the same impact? Maybe. Maybe.
Hmm.
Right?
I agree.
But
Right.
even if it didn't, even if Christopher Nolan is the new Francis Coppola, okay?
Hmm.
There's something to be learned, you know, the lessons of the past. If we don't learn them, we are doomed to relearn them in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
Composition, the intellectual reasoning behind camera movement, not for movement's sake, but for cinema's sake, right? Good lighting, good script writing. All of that doesn't change, and it hasn't changed for 100 years, okay? I don't care who you are, right? So there's relevance even in knowing what they did in a movie made in 1974 as opposed to Captain America, Rise of the whatever that came out last year,
Agreed.
right?
Agreed.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Because that's fine, but there was a whole world that existed before that. Okay?
Right.
It's a rookie mistake to think that everything is happening for the first time just because you're involved. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody mentions a film, you should at least know the director, if not the DP, because of who you are now, guys, as film
Hmm.
students. You should be, if you're particularly interested in camera work and somebody mentions a film to you, you should know the DP. And you should know it because you should be aware of what he's been doing. What's he been up to? You know? Somebody says Hoyt Van Hoytema, I say, oh yeah. Yeah, I'm paying attention to that dude because he's got something going on. He's sharp. He's intelligent. Matty Lebetique, right? Roger Deakins.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a name you don't hear a lot. Darius Kanji, right? And
Right.
even Storero is not really a household name anymore. Some people
Mm-hmm.
don't even know who he is, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly Gordon Willis, who just recently died last year. All these guys,
Yes.
you know. Um, this is part of your fraternity. It's part of the. This is the diversity and the fabric of the industry that you're choosing to be a part of, and you should be aware of these people, young and old, that are
Yes,
using
sir.
techniques that you might not have seen yet, and then you might want to. Let's face it, you might want to borrow it. We can learn from each
Yes,
other,
sir.
even if it's an old movie. So keep that in mind, and maybe I'll leave you with that tone for this week. And if you have any issues or anything with your assignment, reach out to me. I'll get back in touch with you as soon as I can. And I'm interested to see what you guys come up with.
Right, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Quick Q
One
and
of
A.
the questions.
Do we need a quick Q and A for any reason?
I have one quick question
Yeah. Okay.
that not about the assignment, but again for information. Just because I was curious and I don't know, I tried to look this online, I couldn't find it.
Uh,
But the Black Magic Ursa Mini has recently come out. and it claims to be a lightweight
The Pro.
35 digital film camera.
Hmm.
Now, is it a film camera or is it a digital camera? Is it both? Because I'm looking at it and I don't see where the film can go into it. And it's when I'm reading about it, it's telling me
Cliff, are
it's
you kidding
got.
me?
I'm sorry.
Are you kidding me?
Stop, Mike.
Am I being duped right now? Is there a camera somewhere?
Professor Mike quit it.
No, it's a digital camera. It's all right. So film, when we say film now, yeah, because we grew up in an age when film meant film. It meant ester-based polyester emulsion on plastic.
Right.
Now, the term film has been co-opted and resignified to indicate cinematic aesthetic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a video camera like HPX 270 from Panasonic, a handheld iteration of a shoulder-mounted video camera that's now been shrunk in size because they can. And the technology's increased, so now it shoots 4K resolution and it does all these interesting and cool things. And it's digital capture. But we call that a video camera, and for some reason we call a Blackmagic a cinema camera, which is probably a
Well,
more accurate turn of phrase than saying a film camera. But they're calling it digital film now, and I guess I'm falling into the trap of casually throwing the term around as well. But there's no emulsion in there. There's no magazine. There's none of that. None of that. However, the performance of the camera at 15 stops of latitude. They used to say that 35 millimeter motion picture film performed on par with a resolution that was 4K, um, and the latitude of 35 millimeter film was about that we used to say it was 7 up and 6 down. That's 13 stops of latitude, right? I
Right.
remember I remember that little, you know, rule of thumb as a kid loading magazines when I'd hear the DP talking about 7 up and 6 down. He wasn't talking about drinks at craft service. He was talking about range of latitude, 7 stops of overexposure and 6 stops of underexposure before you lost critical information on the negative. Okay, and we called that Dmax and Dmin. If you were talking about the science of the negative in terms of densitometry, the density of the negative. 7
Mm-hmm.
stops of overexposure latitude meant that your skies would still have evidence of clouds in them and they wouldn't blow out to white, even though your key on the ground might have been an 8 and the exposure in the sky might have been a 22.
Mm-hmm.
That overexposure latitude meant that you were still going to see things like tonal value in the sky, and clouds, at least cloud profiles, um, as opposed to a white blown out sky that you get on a DSLR now. DSLR has 10 to 12 stops of latitude. I have the Blackmagic 4K cinema camera, the production camera, and it has, they say it has 13 stops of latitude, and I can squeak another stop and a half out of it using low com filters. So at 15 stops of latitude, that Ursa Mini Pro that just came out, that exceeds the specs of film. It's 4.6K resolution, and it's 15 stops of latitude. So when they call it a film camera, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, there's no emulsion running through it, but the specs are the same, if not better. So it's almost a fair statement, but it's a little misleading if you're, if you're caught off guard with their nomenclature at this point. But I wouldn't.
Yeah, I was reading in Video Pro, but all the other stories were talking about these recent objects being shot on regular film, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe they just put this in here because they want to, like you said, talk about the stops and all that, or maybe they're talking about putting it in because it is a film camera, and they're talking about all these films even the TV series that were produced. So that's what threw me.
Yeah, film camera from the point of view of process, not of media.
Mhm.
So the process of filming something, with crew and lights and blocking and shooting and rehearsals and production schedules and the whole structure and bones of the cinematic process of manufacturing can be done with a digital acquisition device or a film acquisition device at this point. And the majority of the work is actually happening with digital acquisition now. But the process is still quote unquote film. It's the business of filmmaking. And so I think it's kind of fair. I think that's why I didn't have, a huge conservative backlash emotion about them, sort of co-opting the word film, because they're still honestly trying to duplicate the process of filmmaking. They just changed the capture device. That's all.
Right.
And I wouldn't
Thank you.
hesitate to use that Ursa Mini Pro for anything, quite frankly.
Hmm.
The gamma compares, and I've had pros back this up that are shooting on Alexas every day, and they say, yeah, the Blackmagic cinema cameras and the Ursa Mini, yeah, we would use that for a B camera without any question if they told us that's what we could afford. So obviously, it's less about performance of the camera now and more about ergonomics and footprint. If you have a cinema lens, you've got a wider throw on the focus, so it's easier for the focus puller to use than a 50 millimeter 1.2 from the Canon L series. You can put them up on the screen, okay? And I know cameramen who do it all the time. Gail Tattersall is a friend of mine. He shot 6 seasons of House, mixing Cooke S4 optics on an Arri studio camera that he owned with Canon 5D and L series glass. And when I said, "Are you telling me?" Because I asked him, "How are you putting the Cookes on the 5D?" And he said, "I'm not." And I said, "So what you're telling me is L series glass is sitting in the cutting room with Cooke S4 optics, and you're cutting them together and making a TV show, and nobody has said anything." And he said, "That's right. No one can tell." And he showed me a whole series of clips that he had done throughout the season 5 or 6. And asked me to tell him which ones were 5D and which ones were film. And I couldn't tell him because he's so good at lighting and he's so good at all the other um, uh, methods of gauging quality, composition, framing, movement, um, that you can't perceive the difference between film and digital when you're working with a guy who's a master of his tools, like Gail is. So, you know, uh, whether it's digital or not, whether it's an Alexa or an Ursa Mini, uh, you know, and because a lot of people will say, "Well, what's the best camera then? What should I get?" And I always tell people, the best camera for the job is the one you can lay your hands on right now and shoot something. It doesn't do you any good to say, "Well, if I had an Alexa, I could have done a better job." That's malarkey, right? If you got a phone and that's the only tool that you have available to you and you have to get a shot now, right? Cowboy up, baby. That's why we call you a professional, and you get or will get paid the rates that you deserve, because you can get an image out of the phone with its constraints and with its aesthetic issues that will be functional within the context of the story you're shooting. And that's what it's all about. And the rest of it is all window dressing.
Mhm.
You know, I may be preaching to the choir though, but nevertheless, do it with what you got. Love the one you're with, as
Mhm.
the song used to say. That's it. That's all I got for you guys tonight, unless you just want to chat.
Awesome.
I mean, go finish the discussion.
Yeah, I got a thing. Great. Good talking to you guys. It was good talking.
Good talking to you.
You too.
I look forward to what you're going to send me this week. And again, reach out if you have any questions or anything. We nip them in the bud as soon as possible.
Yes, sir.
And, otherwise, I will talk to you next week, and I'll see you around the discussion post.
Great, thanks.
All right, guys. Have a good night.
Enjoy.
Good evening.
You too.
Have a good night, fellas.
All right.